And so here we have an exercise. And so this is a follow-up to the previous exercise where we generated random nucleotide sequences, or UMIs, and checked to see if they have the GGCC sequence in them, which would mean that they could get cut by a restriction enzyme. And if they can get cut 5 times, then we decided that this would be some sort of special threshold where something bad happens in the experiment. And so we're interested in how many UMIs do you need to sample? In other words, what is the number of trials you need to get to encounter 5 of these cut events, or 5 successes in the language of probability distributions. And what we want to do now is, let's say we're starting with the data. So we didn't generate it. Let's say that we've run an experiment and actually we have the data. So we're looking at a set of numbers of trials to 5 cuts. And we've hypothesized that the distribution here, so this is the negative binomial distribution function, or the Pascal distribution, it's called. So we have an analytical expression here, and we're proposing the hypothesis that this process explains the data that we have. And what we want to do is fit this distribution to our data by changing the parameters here. And so this distribution works more or less how we've set it up here. So there are a critical number R of success events. And so this gives you the probability for a given number, a certain number of trials. So how many trials it takes to get to R success events for a given probability of a success on any one event. So the 2 parameters in this case are the critical number and the probability for one trial. And then the random variable, the X variable here, or K here, is the number of trials. And so if we were to plot it, it would look like this, right? We have trials on the X-axis and probability on the Y-axis. And if we were to change the R parameter here, we would see that this curve shifts. So a larger number of parameters kind of push the distribution to the right. And so we have a certain spread of data, and what we want to do is fit this distribution. And so that's the task. And the way we can do this is by performing the maximum likelihood estimation method. So what we're going to do is make a function that computes the negative log likelihood for this distribution. So we have this distribution function in the code that I've set up here in the GitHub. You have already set up distribution function for this Pascal or negative binomial distribution. What we want to do is make a negative log likelihood function, and then that's going to be the loss function that is fed into our optimizer, which is also already set up. So let's go through the solution now. And so like I said, in the first part, we're just trying to set up our functions here. And so, so in the very beginning, we're importing some data, generated data, and you could also use the data that you generated in the previous exercise. But, and then, so we have this negative binomial function here, and this is going to give us return the probability, right? So this is basically our PMF, right? And so it accepts an X value, or K in this case, and then 2 parameters, R and P. What we want to do is build our loss function here. So we want to spit out the negative log likelihood that's going to be used for our optimization. And the idea here is that we are going to feed in the data, and we want to compute this, this product likelihoods, so these probabilities. And the way we can do that computationally efficiently is by working with logs. So those can then be summed instead of multiplied. And so you see that right here. So we have the log likelihood. It's being computed iteratively. So it's starting out as 0, but then we're taking the log of whatever PMF probability value is spat out, and then adding that. So computing the sum to whatever we have there previously. And it's going to do this for all K in the data, for every data point that we have. And the probability is getting computed by this negative binomial PMF function that we have up here. And then at the very end, right, it's not the log likelihood, but it's the negative log likelihood. So we're just returning this minus sign here. So this was the problem that I wanted you to solve. And then the second part is already kind of set up for you. But what it's going to do is run this minimizer. So this is the way this function works, is it takes a loss function, so our NLL, our negative log likelihood function, some initial guesses, which we've just set roughly around where we expect R and P to be. So we know that the true value actually is 5, and then the probability we could actually compute by counting the number of successes and total trials. But here we just provide a rough estimate, a rough guess. And then we've also set some bounds. So these are the lower and then upper bounds of R and P respectively. And then these are to prevent the optimizer from going crazy. So we've said that, probability needs to be between 0 and 1, and R parameter needs to be positive. And then this minimize function will perform an optimization. So we're calling a function from an external library. So we haven't written a minimize function ourselves. We're just utilizing it here. But then the final result should give us our 2 parameters that we're looking for. And so here we can see the solution basically. So this last chunk of code here is just visualizing it. So we have the histogram code that's just from the original data. So that's the blue back here. And then we've overlaid or superimposed on top of it the fitted distribution that we plotted. And you can see that it follows it quite nicely. Let's just go to this one. So we should also be spitting out values for the fitted parameters. So in this particular example that I'm showing here, it found an R of 5 and a P of 0.06. And so those are the parameters that were discovered for that one. And then I'm not showing it here for this particular one. So that's for Python. And then for R, it's going to work more or less the same way. So we've already pre-written a negative binomial function here. And the task then was to complete this negative log likelihood function. And the idea here is, once again, that we have a for loop that's going to go through each of the data points. And for each of those data points, we want to compute the likelihood, in other words, the probability associated with that particular X point, that data point, number of trials, given a set of parameters that have been fed into the function. And we want that probability to be logged, take the log of that. And then we want to multiply that by -1 to have the negative log likelihood. And these logs, we want to be summing them all together for each data point. So we compute these for one data point, but then we want to add the log likelihood of the next data point and the next one to get a total summation for our set of data and an overall negative log likelihood value. And then that becomes our loss function. Once again, using an initial guess, a rough estimate, and then performing a minimization using this optim function here, which is going to take an initial guess, some lower and upper bounds, and a loss function, this NLL here, and it will try to minimize it by manipulating the parameters that go in. And then so at the very end, we get this result file, result variable here. And if we fetch the first and second element of that result variable, that's going to be our R and P, or our estimated parameters, also known as our maximum likelihood estimate. And you can see once again, so we visualize it here, the original data in the background, and then the fitted curve here in red. And so this is just another note. So the more samples we have, the more precise our fits are going to get. So here, the generated data was for 1,000 samples, but if we do 10,000, we can get a nicer looking curve here and a closer estimate, closer to the true value, which we know to be 5